and welcome to the Transforming Construction Network Plus webinar. Just to say a few words about the network. The Transforming Construction Network Plus is about stimulating participation, facilitating collaboration, and encouraging exploration. It unites the construction's academic and industrial communities to create a new research and knowledge base dedicated to addressing the systemic problems holding back the sector. You can find out more information about the Network Plus at this website. It's funded by the UK Research and Innovation through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. It's supported by the UK's Research and Innovation funding. The aim of the Network Plus is to provoke, enable and amplify innovation through 4 main objectives: knowledge, community building, business models, investment and legacy. And today our seminar is around rethinking the business model for off-site construction. And we're bringing 2 internationally leading academics into the webinar to talk to us in the UK about rethinking business models, to bring international perspectives from the Bay Area, from across Europe, from the Great Bay in Hong Kong and the China area. And so I'm going to hand over to Daniel Hall, who's sitting in ETH Zurich, to talk to us about business models from off-site construction and the work that he's been doing.
Thanks very much, Jennifer, and I'd like to thank the Transforming Construction Network Plus for inviting me. And personally, I find this is a really interesting topic to understand the new business models for off-site construction. And I'll talk a little bit about my background in a moment, but it's clear to me that off-site construction is not business as usual, and instead we really need new approaches all the way from the way that we think about manufacturing and fabrication up all the way to the design process. But we'll get into that in a second. So let me start by talking about a little bit about my background. So, great. So a little bit about myself. I did my PhD at Stanford University and finished in 2017. And while I was there, I was the founder and then for several years, the lead organizer of the Industrialized Construction Forum at Stanford. And so I'll begin by talking a little bit about what I see happening in Silicon Valley in California with industrialized construction, and seeing and discussing some of these emerging business models from that part of the world. I was also really privileged to visit Imperial College in 2016. So I also got a good sense of the UK context and what's happening with industrialized construction, off-site construction in the UK. And then I have some experience in the traditional industry, so I know a lot about the headaches and hassles that come from the overall traditional industry approach to everything built on site. And then since 2018, I've been assistant professor of innovative and industrial construction here at ETH Zurich in Switzerland. And at the end of my presentation, I'll give an overview of some of the emerging trends and technical opportunities that I see occurring from my short time here in Switzerland so far. So let's get into it. I use the term industrialized construction. Now, I know that Dr. Wei Pan will also have another term that he'll use as well. And I'll just say that there are many terms about off-site construction. And for now, I'm going to use the term industrialized construction, but I use that in a holistic way. So I always like to ask the question, what is industrialized construction? Is it more than just prefabrication? Because if we're just talking about taking a traditional process and prefabricating it, we might think that there's not such a big change in the business model. There's not such a large change in the approach. But instead, I think a more helpful framework to think about industrialized construction is a holistic one. And we can think about it as involving not just prefabrication, but integrating in things like product platforms, automation, advanced logistics and IT tools, while also having a strong customer focus and understanding who the end user will be. And I don't have time to get into all of this in detail, but I just want to say that one important takeaway is that industrialized construction, offsite construction, is not simply moving tasks offsite, but requires a holistic approach. Let me talk a little bit about the US market and what's happening, especially led in Silicon Valley. We recently wrote a white paper trying to describe some of the emerging trends. And one of the most stark trends is the amount of investor funding in offsite production occurring in the US. So this chart shows the amount of investment funding, mostly from venture capital, that's been investing in industrialized construction. A large part of so now in 2018, the number was over $1 billion in funding. Now, a large part of that went to one single company, Katerra, who I'll briefly mention later. But I also want to note that it's not just one company. In fact, there are many companies receiving investments in industrialized construction. This tends to be the US kind of startup model. It happens in different ways in different cultural contexts, of course, but this is what's currently happening in the US. And the other trend that we're seeing is that the US market is being kind of dominated right now with news of new startups and also of big tech being very interested in the different areas of offsite industrialized construction. So for example, Airbnb will now begin their own offsite program called Samara. Amazon has made investments in a company called Plant Prefab. I mentioned Katerra, who has raised over $1 billion total in venture capital and other investments. And there's examples of also Google or WeWork, all being very interested in this area of offsite construction. Okay, but how are these firms organizing for industrialized construction? Do we see anything different about these startups or new attempts at industrialized construction that differs from our traditional project-based fragmented industry structure? And that's one of the main points that I'll present today is 3 different approaches that I've seen about how firms have been approaching offsite construction. Now, I don't want to say that these are the only 3 approaches. In fact, there can be many different business models and approaches, but these are 3 that I noticed and that I think have a growing momentum for business models in offsite construction. So let me start with the first one, and this is a story of a spin-off from a traditional general contractor company. So DPR Construction is well known in the US. They also have an international reach, but they've become one of the top 10 general contractors in the United States. And through their kind of lead digital skills and BIM coordination talents, they recognized that there was a big opportunity for offsite construction. But they also recognized that this was something that they would need to build up their own capacities and invest in if they really wanted to fully embrace it. So around 2 or 3 years ago, they decided to spin off a separate company called Digital Building Components that was funded through DPR Construction, but completely a separate entity. And the point of Digital Building Components was to set up a factory environment with a strong approach for digital fabrication and to coordinate directly from a BIM, a building information model, all the way through the fabrication process. And here's one example from their factory you could find on their website. Now, if you look at the advantages of such an approach from DPR Construction and their spinoff of Digital Building Components, DPR did not have to change much about its established business, and instead, by creating a spinoff, was able to have a connection point and a relation with a new fabrication factory. And it created this structured learning process where the 2 firms could now learn from one another. But if we note some of the disadvantages of such an approach, it tends to be slower in implementation. It takes a while to build up the capacities of this new factory, and there still is a kind of differentiation line between the 2 companies. And also, in my conversations with both companies, they've talked about the need to re-educate the supply chain. So every single project will bring a different team of stakeholders together. And DPR and Digital Building Components will have to kind of describe how does offsite production work, How can the design need to be changed? What is the digital information flow that needs to occur between the different stakeholders? And this re-education of supply chain takes a significant amount of time. The second approach that I see is one of vertical integration. So I mentioned Katerra earlier, and here you can kind of see, you know, their approach. They are now valued, I saw recently, at $4 billion. They have an international reach. They've made acquisitions of full architecture firms. They're trying to build 4 factories across the US, and they've also made agreements or purchases of factories internationally with projects in the Middle East, with an acquisition or a merger with an infrastructure company in India that does prefabrication. So they're operating on a massive global scale that I don't think we've ever seen before in the construction industry. They definitely have the attention and the worry of many of the established players. What Katerra is doing as a business model is one of vertical integration, complete vertical integration, all the way from kind of a detailed understanding of the real estate acquisition, from design through engineering, configuration, and then configuration of the building from their kit of parts, followed by the manufacturing of the material in their own factories, and then even the final assembly on the construction site. And Katerra is not the only company that's pursuing this vertical integration. In fact, I see this as a trend going around the world. So we have examples such as BoKlok, which is a joint venture between Skanska and IKEA in Sweden, and they've recently expanded into the UK. That also takes this vertical integration approach. And we see other examples in the US that are pursuing this. The vertical integration really provides the opportunities for a full stack product integration. So you can really connect from design all the way through production using this full, the full control. And it also allows you to go very fast. So you're able to kind of iterate and design a new product, get it onto the market, design your own systems around engineering and configuring those buildings. But there's one major downside, and that's that this approach is extremely capital intensive. So now you're investing in your own factory that you have to source from your own line of products, and from your own line of projects. This can be very capital intensive and can, right now we're in a very good economy. We have a lot of projects, but what happens when that economy slows down? Will we have the effect of stranded capital? And I think this is a risk that vertical integration will face in the future. Finally, the third one is one that I call digital systems integration. I think this is the least popular of the different models, but I think it's also one that shows an interesting amount of potential. This is a startup called Project Frog, also from the Silicon Valley Bay Area. They're headquartered in San Francisco, and you can see on the left side, this is their kit of parts that they've developed. On the right side, you can see their approach, where they have a product design and a parts library. But then they're able to create an automation engine, or I like to call it a configurator, that then translates directly into manufacturing and construction. Now, the interesting approach of Project Frog is that they actually don't manufacture anything themselves, but they have long-term partners in the supply chain that allows them to understand what products they can offer, and then what they will be able to build in the end. And here's an example of their online configurator. You can go to the video. I put the link here. This is just online. So right now you can go and decide about the size of the building. You can put walls. This is a school building. You can also input doors, windows, all the shear walls, so that you make sure you have the right structural properties. But this is a lightweight browser-based configuration engine. This is not something that's happening within a Revit file, but instead it's linked downstream with these activities. I'll talk about in a moment. And so once you've created this, they'll run a design status check to make sure it fits with the local jurisdictions and also the structural requirements. And then within a short amount of time, you can produce the manufacturing bill of materials, component model at the BIM LOD 400, and the set of shop drawings for manufacturing. At the same time, you can also automate the creation of structural calculations, architectural drawings, and structural drawings. And so this is an interesting approach that has the advantages that it's quite capital light. As I mentioned, Project Frog is more of a software company than they are a manufacturer, but they use the principles of Industry 4.0, smart distributed factories, and they become the integration between the different pieces of the puzzle. And this allows them to have more agile development, so they're able to kind of flex with the product that they're designing, and now they're going to be looking, they can continue to look into new markets and new different approaches. But there are just some downsides to this approach. You don't have as much control over the final product. Instead, you have to engage in co-creation with your suppliers. So you have to make sure they have the manufacturing capabilities and can also meet the demands that you have. So in some ways, it's a longer process and you have less control. So you're a little bit more subject to the changes in the supply chain. So these are the three approaches that I see emerging. As I mentioned, they're not the only approaches that exist. But we see that the Spinoff approach from DPR to move towards digital building components, and this is also a trend happening in the US with other large general contractors that I've talked to, are also taking this approach, either a separate firm or within their own company of creating their own factories. And the advantage is that there's little change to the business model. It kind of remains the same, but you start up this new entity, but it's a little bit slower and it requires re-education of the supply chain. We also see the second approach is one of full vertical integration that allows you to go very quickly and integrate among all the different typically fragmented areas of the construction industry. But this is a very capital intensive approach and might be risks to downturns in the economic cycle. And third, we have the digital systems approach that Project Frog uses, and this is capital light and leverages Industry 4.0 for more agile development, but there's less control of the product and it requires co-creation and strategic product design with suppliers in the supply chain. So here's three approaches, and again, I think that we have room for all three of these to continue to expand and grow. I see other examples, for instance, of the last one that I didn't mention with approaches such as WikiHouse, which is in the UK, and other new digital systems integration approaches for these online cloud-based configuration platforms. I want to speak a little bit about the trends that I see among all three of these and trends that I see for industrialized construction, and briefly give you an overview of some of the future opportunities as we move forward. So one distinct trend that I see in industrialized construction is this idea of product platforms. And here we see the kind of approach that industrialized construction can take. So as you move from left to right, you have your design and customer acquisition, a set of configuration engineering with a kit of parts, manufacturing, production, and assembly and logistics. And on the bottom, you can see the information is being transferred downstream. This is nothing new. In the construction industry, we often start with design and transfer information downstream in the process. But what's noticeably different about product platforms is that it also enables you to embed rules and restraints and transfer them upstream into the earlier processes. So you can take the assembly and logistics restraints or the manufacturing and production constraints and embed them into your design side system so that you make sure you can design something that can be manufactured efficiently. You can know the cost earlier, and you can also engage in multidisciplinary optimization of your buildings. And this is where this idea of configuration engineering really comes into play, because we know the products. The challenge of this is that now you have less flexibility in the system, and I'll address that in a moment as well. Another trend is this idea of a kit of parts. So from your platform can be a standardized product platform. It can be a standardized approach to the building system. Legos is a great example. And from that platform, you have a project kit. So you develop a kit for each project, but it's predefined for each kit. And then from the kit, you create your projects. An important thing to note here is, different from our traditional project-based industry, with a platform, you can embed all of your learnings and knowledge into the platform and then release the platform in iterative versions. So you can have version 1 of your platform and version 2 of your product platform and kind of iterate the same way you would with an iPhone, creating a better version each time. And this is really important because the knowledge and learning from the previous projects can then flow into the platform and create longitudinal continuity that we don't typically have when we go from project to project. The next thing I like to see is that we're moving from BIM-as-input to BIM-as-output. And this is how I like to describe it. On the left, you see This is a very rough and quick sketch that I made in maybe 10 minutes about what the BIM process is like. But traditionally in the construction industry, we kind of start with the BIM as being the starting point, and we move through the different project stages, adding or taking away information from that BIM as we see fit. But what I see the future across all of these different business models and a trend in offsite construction is that instead we're moving to BIM being an output, and the actual kind of computational work and design coordination happens in these design platforms or cloud-based configurators that has manufacturing and assembly constraints embedded within it. And then downstream, similar to how Project Frog used their approach, you have manufacturing, assembly, and permitting coordination that can be automatically generated. And this is where the BIM comes out at the end and can be used then, for example, in some type of 4D schedule simulation or something like this. And then you can link upstream using APIs into certain design studios, for example, Revit or Rhino or whatever it is that you're using for design. But this goes away from file-based BIM that is the input and the start of the process to BIM becoming an output that can be used in later points. But we really need an integrated approach to offsite construction so that the fabrication can be done without information loss in the end. Finally, I think the big opportunity as well moving forward will be factory bespoke prefabrication. And now I'm talking a little bit about some of the work that's ongoing at the National Center for Competence in Research in Digital Fabrication here at ETH Zurich. We have a large group, a number of different principal investigators working on robotics and digital fabrication. And here you see one example from our recent DFAB house, where we can use factory bespoke prefabrication. So now we have much more flexibility using robotics and automation to create modules. And this was recently put into place at the DFAB house, recently opened in February here in Zurich. And a full demonstrator of digital fabrication where we use 6 different technologies for digital fabrication and robotics. And the previous spatial timber assemblies was just one example that I showed you. But this is a fully permitted and digitally built house. We have people living in it right now, and it's also available for tours. And it was made using robotic fabrication in a bespoke way, which I think will be a tremendous opportunity in the future. And you can look at the YouTube video for the NCCR digital fabrication and see more about the DFAB house. And to wrap up, to summarize how I see the approach moving forward is I think that offsite, we're on 2 ends of a spectrum right now. And if I could describe it like this, on the left side, we have digital fabrication and robotics, what I just showed. And right now it's in the research lab. We've completed our house. We also see examples of 3D printing housing coming out. But it's much too expensive and it's quite difficult to scale at this point. The technology is getting more advanced and we're getting closer to hitting the market, but it's too far away, I think, at this point right now. And then on the right side, we have offsite industrialized construction. And if you think about it's kind of the basic approach is increased productivity and stacking these modules on top of one another. But this sometimes doesn't introduce the flexibility and customization that we need for the industry. I think one way we're moving towards more flexibility is platforms and mass customization. So the ability to configure buildings using a kit of parts, to me seems to be an emerging trend that helps us move towards more flexibility while still keeping the same amount of productivity in the manufacturing side. But I'll wrap up by saying that I think the biggest opportunity for us in the next 5 to 10 years is somewhere in the middle here. So I don't know what this will be called or what it will look like, but it's some combination of digital fabrication, robotics, platforms, and mass customization, maybe with a whole new term, I'm not sure. But if I was looking to start my own new entrepreneurial company, or if I was looking to make a spin-off or change the direction of my firm, I think this is a really big opportunity. And I also think it's a big opportunity for research as we continue to look at what the future of offsite and industrialized construction will be. So with that, thank you very much. I understand we're not going to have questions now, but we'll have them at the very end. So thanks for your attention. And now I think I turn it over to Wei Pan, Dr. Wei Pan, to go next.
Hi, so that was great, Daniel, and we're going to pass straight over to Wei Pan in Hong Kong. Can I just say to participants that if you would like to ask a question, then please type it into the question box. It would be great if you could indicate your name, your surname, your title and organisation, and we'll do the questions at the end of Wei's presentation. So over to you, Wei.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and depends where you are in the world. Thank you for your time and attention to this little talk. And once again, thanks to the Transforming Construction Network Plus and Jennifer for very kind invitation. My name is Wei Pan. I'm from the University of Hong Kong Civil Engineering Department. In the following 20 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you what we have been doing in Hong Kong under the name Modular Integrated Construction, MIC, the Hong Kong Perspective and Strategy. So to start with, a little bit about myself. I was trained as a structural engineer, gradually moved into the area of construction management and construction innovation and engineering. I still remember my very first job was working under the government as an assistant structure engineer, designing a post-tensioning structural system for a high-rise building. And after that, I worked on the for a main the design institute under the government, and the main contractor, subcontractor, and then developer, spending after 10 years in government and industry. And all of this actually more or less related to prefabrication, offsite construction, and more recently with the focus on modular construction. And then the next slide is a little bit introduction about my center. I'm an executive director of a Hong Kong U Center for Innovation in Construction and Infrastructure Development. My center was established in 2002. We are a leading research unit in the areas of construction innovation and infrastructure. We're particularly interested in the areas low carbon building and construction, digital construction, and integrated project delivery. Offsite construction modular building is one of our strategic focuses. And Hong Kong is a typical high-rise, high-density city. And I think for over 10 years, we have maintained the world record for the largest number of high-rise buildings for a city. And that also triggers a serious problem for the shortage of housing supply in the city. And also, we are challenged by health and safety issues. And on average, we have 20 people die on construction sites in Hong Kong per year, which is totally unethical and unacceptable. In the past 10 years, the construction tendering price in Hong Kong has been going up and doubled. And the workforce is also challenged by the aging issue. We have over 50% of construction workers over 50 years old. And the construction cost in Hong Kong has been notoriously higher and been ranked Asia #1, world #2. So to address all of these issues, we have very proactively looked into modular and offsite construction. And on the screen, actually, you'll see many of the terminologies, concepts being introduced in the past few decades, such as the MMC, modern methods of construction in the UK, PPVC, prefabricated, finished volumetric construction in Singapore, and as well as the industrialized building, systems building in Europe, and also nowadays MIC, modular integrated construction in Hong Kong. And on the screen is some categorization I did as part of my PhD study 13, 14 years ago. We categorized many concepts, but I think the more important thing is on the next slide, which is a high-level summary of the many concepts and approaches, with the prefabricated components and subassembly on level 1, and the prefabricated non-volumetric preassembly on level 2, and then the level 3 is the volumetric preassembly, with the modular building level 4 on top of the pyramid. And this is what we are adopting in Hong Kong, is the pre-finished, prefabricated, modular, integrated construction technology for addressing the challenges we're facing in Hong Kong, as just outlined in one of our early slides. And in our argument, we view the MIC to be the highest level of the spectrum of this pyramid, and that requires the most dedicated attention in the planning and design. And that's why I put out on the next slide. The modular in our argument should not be understood as the product per se, should be understood as the process of a modularization. And integration shouldn't be the integration of the products only, but also the integration of the process, activities, and functions. And construction, the third keyword should be understood in the life cycle philosophy. And in our government policy address, MIC is actually on a top priority policy agenda for the moment. We particularly looked into the worldwide trends for high-rise modular buildings. As I just explained, in Hong Kong, the norm of a building is to construct 40 stories and even taller. So we're particularly looking into the worldwide high-rise modular buildings. We have identified a clear trend of building more and more high-rise modular buildings, and also building taller and taller, with good examples in Singapore, the 40-story precast concrete modular building, and the 44-story ongoing steel-framed modular building in Croydon, London. In Hong Kong, to address our unique challenges, actually, it's also the challenges facing many other mega cities nowadays. The first one is high-rise. We proposed this innovating higher business model. So by business model, I mean the business model for the whole industry and the community of Hong Kong. So the first one, we come up with solutions to address the high-rise. In terms of the structural engineering and the connection details, we will need the robust systems to meet the requirements for the super typhoon and the seismic code requirement. And the second one is the high density. Because of the high density, we wouldn't be enjoying the luxury of very loose transportation limitations or traffic control in many other low-rise cities or areas. So for instance, in Hong Kong, we have to look into the size, dimension of the modules and how they can get along with the current transportation authorities' requirements. So that brings forward the very sharp requirements for the integrated use of GIS and traffic control software and mechanisms. The third one is the high tech. And we are now in the process of integrating the virtual reality, Internet of Things, drones, robots into the process for more efficient utilization of the modular construction. And the last one, arguably, is the most important one, is the higher co-creation. By high co-creation, we need the partnership between the academia, industry, and government. Only by working together, we can transform the traditional construction industry towards more modern and innovative one. And I will explain some of the examples in my following slides. So this is the results of our structural analysis of high-rise modular buildings up to 40-story. And on the screen is an example of the steel-framed modular buildings, and we have done for precast concrete systems as well. So as you can see, we looked into the modularization of the floor plan, how to transfer the traditional in situ floor plan into the one which is friendly to steel frame modular use. And Hong Kong is a place with a few super typhoons a year. And the wind speed in Hong Kong can be as large as 200 kilometers per hour. So it's about 50 meters per second. So we have a very tough wind code imposed by the building authority. So we're particularly looking into the robust connection design and detailed design. And the next one is our research work addressing the high density. We are particularly looking into the integrated solution and that combining the use of a BIM, having the geometry information and input, output into the collider file, into the GIS model. And we have the installation schedule of the modules and generated in the software. And then as the IFC extraction, integrated into the BIM supported GIS model. So from the bottom right figure, you can see three colors. The green colored part of the building represents the modules already installed, and the two red colored ones represent the modules being installed, and the gray colored ones means the modules to be controlled, to be installed. So this will provide a good technological platform for the project control. And we're also looking into the vehicle routing planning under the smart logistics. As I explained, Hong Kong is a very high density place. So we don't have the luxury of the two-way roads, and they are very relaxed in terms of the width of the transportation system and for some of the places. So we built up a four layers structure with the city 3D model, project 3D layer, and the road network and the logistic routing. And the higher co-creation really means the partnership between academia and government and industry. On the screen, there are 4 MIC projects. The bottom right is the complete CSE MIC display center as a demonstration project of the modular building in Hong Kong. And the other 3 are in the process of site formation and module production. The first one is the project with 2 20-story towers of a student hostel, which is being constructed, being mobilized on the campus of the Hong Kong University. That is the one using the steel framed modules. And the bottom left one is the one for the staff quarter of the fire services department, being managed by the architectural services department of the government. And we're also involved in this project to oversee the process and the performance of the module production and installation. So that is the one using the precast concrete modules, 5 buildings or up to 17 stories. The technological solution normally will work, but not always. It's very important to provide a supportive political environment and also supportive regulatory environment. And to address that aspect, we have produced a MIC strategy paper, Rethinking Hong Kong Construction, entitled Modularization for Modernization, M for M. And this is really a fresh report because we just launched it yesterday at the University of Hong Kong. And this strategy paper provides a very comprehensive historical review and the theoretical review of the approach modular construction. And it sets the vision for the future modular construction development in Hong Kong. And it also elaborates many of the scenarios in addressing the 10 variables as illustrated in the figure on the right, such as the building height, up to 20 story, 20 to 40 story, or above 40 stories, the building type, the functional area, project location, because in Hong Kong, we have 3 main districts, the New Territory, Kowloon, and Hong Kong Island. And Hong Kong Island is with a lot of a slope, and the building construction is more challenging in this area. As a kind of to wrap up what I've presented in the early slides, we promote a 5-fold systems framework for modular construction research. In other words, unless we fully and properly address all of the 5 areas, we would struggle and we would face different types of challenges in the promotion and the adoption of modular construction for high-rise, high-density development. So it's very important to look into the 5 areas in an integrated manner. So the first one is to ensure technical feasibility, and solutions didn't exist for 40-story or even taller buildings under the wind code, seismic codes, wind situations in Hong Kong. And I mentioned earlier, Hong Kong receives very, very super typhoon, very challenging typhoon a few times a year. And the second one is we must ensure regulatory compliance. So if there is any conflict with the existing regulations, and we must work together with the relevant authorities and to see how and if any regulations could be relaxed to receive the construction innovation. And the third one is to look into the commercial viability, because in the end, we don't want any, as a mainstream, we want to encourage the industry uptake of the new technology. And we don't want people losing their job and the companies going bankrupt. And the fourth one is the supply chain competence. Hong Kong is a small city, and it depends how you look at it. And we actually hugely rely on overseas procurement and the supply chain. So we need to look into the multimodal transportation and also cross-border and logistics. And the final one is the market preference. And we must look into the different requirements from different building sectors, such as school building, hostel building, public housing, private housing. Not every building sector faces the same challenges. So we have to look into in a progressive manner. But I strongly believe, as long as we look into the 5 areas in an integrated manner, and working very closely with the building authorities, industry, I'm speaking from the perspective of academia, and there should be a very positive and encouraging future for the take-up of high-rise, high-density modular buildings, not just in Hong Kong, but also in other mega cities. So that's really I'm sharing with all the participants in this webinar about the Hong Kong perspective and the strategy and the research we are doing for the moment. I'm very welcome any comments or questions. And probably now I hand over to Jennifer and look forward to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great to have 2 fantastic presentations to provoke some discussion and thinking here. I wonder, we're beginning to get questions through on the question, and I would encourage participants to type in their questions. But I'd like to start with a question for both of you. So you've been working in this area for some time. You've been seeing what we're doing in the UK around the sector deal and the transforming construction agenda. I wonder if you have any thoughts about the incentives to change and advice for the UK as we look to transform construction. Daniel, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. I think first of all, the biggest advice is to also look around, see what's happening internationally. I'm convinced this is not a movement contained to the UK or Switzerland or Hong Kong, but is an international movement towards industrialization. We've had these movements before, but I will say I think this one is different. I think, so that's my first advice. And the second one is that it's going to take a multifaceted approach. And we see that, I think, very well with Hong Kong as an example, if I might say, is that it's a combination of entrepreneurship, but also regulatory environments and policies. And then also kind of a reskilling of the industry. I spoke with one company in the US who told me they were looking to hire an experienced, maybe what we would call an experienced project manager, but what they really wanted was somebody with half the skills of an experienced construction manager and half the skills of an industrial engineer. And such a profile doesn't really exist. They can't find somebody with 20 years of experience with that profile. So this kind of reskilling will also be a key point moving forward.
Wei, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, thanks, Jennifer. I think that's a very good question. To me, nowadays, international sharing, knowledge exchange is unavoidable and is a really must-have for success. For our research and development in Hong Kong, we have always identified London as a very good place to benchmark, to learn from. Actually, for many of our MIC projects being carried out, being developed, we have seriously looked into the past experience of high-rise modular buildings in central London. We have visited many of the modular buildings in London for learning purposes, for exchange with the local practitioners there. And also another point in response to your question is industry in the traditional manner it really struggle to address the many challenges actually facing the mega cities nowadays, such as the shortage of labor and the aging workforce and the super high construction cost. And these challenges do not just face Hong Kong, but also other many cities like New York, London, Singapore, Melbourne, Sydney, and so on and so forth. So I think personally, I see there is a strong need or huge benefit if we can, you know, and a serious look into the sharing and build up something for better exchange.
Thank you. So I'm going to move into questions from participants. And Daniel, there's one that's particularly for you, and it's from Ron Lang, who's in the BRE and Construction Innovation Hub here. And he says, you mentioned that digital systems approach was the least popular. Could you explain why? It probably aligns most closely with the UK government's appetite for a digitally enabled platform approach to procuring social infrastructure.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's just in my experience, I've seen the least amount of attempts at this. I think partially because often in the construction industry, we lack the digital skills to implement such a platform. I think if you look at most people in the industry, they're builders, and the idea of building in a factory versus building on a site might be a little bit more tangible. So I haven't seen as many approaches. I think we're definitely seeing it, but I think this kind of platform approach, and I don't know fully the agenda within the UK at the moment, so I can't say too much, but I do think it's important to note that this is different than a common data environment approach. So common data environment is really, I think, about linking and coordinating information. In my opinion, I'm painting with a broad brush, but this is my perspective. And this platforms with digital systems integration is really about an ecosystem around industrialized construction and long-term partners, and less about kind of creating a common language of data. So in my opinion, it's a challenging approach, but so that's why I've seen less, but I can't say exactly why there is less overall, other than you know, that's just been my observations.
Okay, so we have another question here from Jeff Matsu from the RICS, so from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, who asks, while investment flows over the past few years have grown substantially, the absolute levels are still quite low in the UK. So two questions. What will catalyse the change so that modular becomes more mainstream? can be done to encourage lenders to support non-traditional building methods? And on what time frame do we see this occurring? So there's two parts to the question.
Maybe Wei, you could say a little bit about what you've seen in Hong Kong, and I'll try to think of a good answer.
Okay, then I kick off in answering this question. Yes, this is a very spot-on question, and we get asked this question or similar all the time. I think modular construction shouldn't be understood as a panacea. It may not happen overnight to become a mainstream, or maybe never. But it's a very good supplement, and it is a very good triggering point to transform the construction industry, and from the old-fashioned site-based productions, type of activities, towards value-driven and technology-supported modern production. I think that is definitely the direction, but that may take a lot of efforts. In terms of the investment, I think that this is probably something for the government and the industry. They have to work together for governments and provide incentives to start with, and more importantly, to provide a supportive policy and regulatory framework to drive, to encourage the market to follow up. And if I can again give you some examples of such business models at the macro level. So start with the UK. I worked in the UK and started in the UK for 10 years. To me, UK business for modular building was really policy driven, but nowadays it's more market driven. And another business model is Singapore. And Singapore's promotion and adoption of a PPVC, which is another term for modular construction, is really driven by the policy, by the government. And they have also included this as part of the requirement for the land sale. So if you don't adopt PPVC, you can't get the land, and then you're out of the business. So back in Hong Kong, we are considering all these different types of business models, and they seek for the best compilation for a particular step of the modularization process.
Thank you. I'm going to move us on to another question. And Daniel, if you have thoughts on the last one, then maybe you can incorporate them. So this is a question from Jennifer Schooling at CSIC, University of Cambridge. And she asks, industrialization of construction must consider the construction site as part of the factory, i.e. we need to introduce the same level of process controls, etc. What advice do you have for how we transform the on-site culture and approach to be more systematic and process driven, rather than the more ad hoc and reactive approach currently used? And Daniel, if you could start us on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's absolutely right that we have to think about the on-site activities, and they don't. I don't think moving work off-site doesn't make things any easier with the on-site work. In fact, you still need precise coordination ahead of time. You need to think about the logistics. Larger buildings, just-in-time delivery becomes more important for delivering modules, because you can't stack 100 modules on a site. So those are all challenges that we face. I think part of it can be creating the same level of standardization within the factory, within how the site is laid out and set up, because now we actually have very precise control over what the final product will be. We know that the product, we have confidence the product will be fabricated to the tolerances that we expect it to be in the factory. Of course, we need some tolerances for fit on site, but these can be relatively low. And then it's about controlling the processes and having a standard approach to the on-site work, so you prepare for off-site. So I think it becomes an extension of this same mentality, and there are several companies that are using this approach. I think about one industrialized company called Connextech in the US, that they found due to fragmentation that they had trouble with the setting of the anchor bolts for their steel system. And so they created an innovative template that they give out to suppliers to make sure that they do it. And now they can install correctly using this kind of tool that acts as a template for the anchor bolt installation of their structural members. So that's just one example.
So I'm going to move us on to a question from Dr. Duncan Maxwell from the Future Building Initiative at Monash University in Australia. And he'd like to ask both speakers what their thoughts are on the role of past dependency, history matters, as a factor in existing construction companies developing new industrialized construction business models. Do the speakers think that there will be disruption emerging from outside of the traditional sector, or will business models evolve from within the sector? Daniel, do you want to go first, or Wei?
Yeah, I can go first. I think that right now traditional within the sector companies are noticing exactly what's happening with these new offsite companies and new offsite approaches, and they're very nervous. And probably rightly so, because it offers a level of increased efficiency that they can't achieve with the on-site work. So they're very nervous, and they're searching for opportunities, absolutely, to do this. And then I think the example I gave of DPR with the Spinoff company helps with that culture change, because you can create a separate entity in many ways, and so you don't have this constant push-pull of on-site, off-site, but instead you kind of say we have this division of this entity that's completely different from our company, but still making a strategic investment in the off-site. So I think that's a good way to go about it. But absolutely, I think that we will see outside players come in. This is an opportunity for them to enter the market. I think we will see innovative existing players transform and change. And then I think we'll see some traditional players exit the market if they cannot compete in this new offsite production approach.
Actually, yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Actually, some very good examples are already happening in some places in the world in terms of the business models and non-construction related organizations penetrating into the construction market. For example, they are companies, actually originated in an information technology sectors. They are now providing IoT systems, particularly for construction sites, for construction logistics, and they penetrate into the market. And they are also international shipping companies who used to produce shipping containers for international logistics business, but now they are actually providing container-based modules for buildings, for building hotels, schools. In some of the cases, they even acquire the construction businesses, become the main contractor, and to have the vertically integrated business model. So they produce modules, the ship modules, and the construct buildings using the modules on site. And personally, I speculate more and more non-construction related organizations coming into the construction sector.
Yeah, great. So we're going to have to leave it here, and I would like to thank both of you for coming on and talking to us. I'd like to say that that the Network Plus for our UK participants in the webinar, then we're holding a Discovery Day around managing supply chains for success on the Thursday, the 27th of June. And to learn more about that and more about the Network Plus, then please follow the link at the bottom of this slide. And thank you for attending, and I hope you've enjoyed the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.